Tim the Tadpole's exams. Hello, this is Natasha. And Bertie's been reminding me that it's been an awfully long time since we gave you some news from the Palace Pond where he lives with the likes of Tim the Tadpole, Colin the Carp and Sadie the Swan. But that doesn't mean to say there hasn't been plenty going on there. For instance, it was Sadie's birthday recently, and the Pond Life threw a mega party in her honour. Sadie looked radiant in her best black feathers. A band of geese honked the music, and everyone swam till dawn. Tim the Tadpole came for the first part, but he couldn't stay because he had to go to bed. He's very small, you see. In fact, he's practically microscopic. And it's Tim the Tadpole that Bertie wants me to tell you about. He's been having some trouble at school, and his mummy has been very worried about him. It's all okay now, but you might like to hear about what happened. It was the end of term at the Tadpole school, and all the tadpoles had to do exams. When Tim came home for the holidays, he was terribly excited about his results. He was turning in cartwheels and calling out, "Mummy! Mummy! Can you guess where I came in the class?" Tim's mum, who is of course a frog, saw that her youngest tadpole seemed ecstatically pleased and proud with himself, and she thought he must have done very well indeed. Did you come first?" she ventured. "No, you never guess," said Tim as he stopped to catch his breath. Did you come first equal?" "No." "Well, then, did you come second?" And Tim gave his mother a little tadpole kiss. "Oh, Mummy, you're taking simply ages to guess the right answer. I want a really big number. The teacher told me that I came 2,974th in my class. Isn't that fantastic?" But Tim's mother found it hard to smile sweetly, and her expression looked just a bit, weak. She didn't want her little tadpole to feel bad about himself, but at the same time, she really would have preferred him to come first, or first equal, or even second, or even third, come to that. She tried to think of something nice to say, which normally she was very good at, but this time it was quite hard. Eventually she said softly to Tim, "Well, darling, it's certainly better than last time." Tim was very pleased, and he swam off to tell Colin the Carp, which wasn't a good idea, because Colin isn't quite as nice as Tim's mum. Colin would say that he's a harbinger of the truth. But most people would just say he's plain old rude, which only goes to show that everything depends on your point of view. Tim found him lurking around the east end of the pond, looking sinister, which is what carps are good at.
"I suppose you could say that's a unique achievement."
"Oh, thank you, Colin. You always say the nicest things," said Tim, with a happy smile on his face. And then Colin couldn't quite help himself. He just had to add what is called the sting in the tail, because that's what Colin does. And so he muttered,
"Uniquely shaped."
And although Colin said this quietly, Tim heard it. And when he thought about what Colin had said, all his excitement suddenly turned to sadness. He was so sad that he swam away crying. "Oh no, am I really, truly stupid?" "Oh, it's not good to be stupid, is it?" "Oh dear." And to tell you the truth, Colin felt rather guilty. It was an unusual feeling for Colin, and he wasn't sure quite what to do about it. Eventually, he decided to go and tell Bertie the Frog that Tim was a bit upset. When Bertie heard what had happened, he searched and searched the pond for his little friend. Finally, he found him in the water under the overhang of the weeping willow tree. He seemed to be concentrating very hard on something. "What are you doing here? All on your own, little Tim?" asked Bertie.
"Counting green algae."
Green algae sometimes looks like slime on the top of the pond, but lots of water creatures eat them because they are extremely nutritious. "And how many algae have you counted?" asked Bertie.
"Well, I started at 1,000,000 and I'm counting backwards. But now I've forgotten where I got to. Oh dear, am I really stupid, Bertie?"
But Bertie assured him that he wasn't at all stupid. He was just original.
"Is that just a big word for stupid?"
asked Tim, and he started to cry. Nothing Bertie could say would cheer him up. All Bertie could do was to lead him home. And when they got there, Tim had cried so much that he was really quite exhausted. His mother tucked him under a leaf, kissed him, and soon he was asleep. She whispered to Bertie, "Oh dear, I know he's never going to be the brightest tadpole in the pond, but I just want him to be happy." "Well, I don't accept that Tim's stupid," said Bertie. "He's just silly, which is another way of saying he gets overexcited sometimes. Don't worry. We'll just teach him to pass his exams. There's just a knack to them, that's all. If you have the knack and you work hard, you can't fail. But if you start to think that you can't do them, then you'll get into a state and do worse and worse. We'll work up a plan for him, a plan of success." And Tim's mother thought that Bertie was being really nice. But she wasn't quite sure that he or anybody else could help Tim do better at school. The next day, Bertie took Tim for a swim around the pond, and while they swam, he asked him all about his exams. First, he asked him how the geography exam was, and Tim said he didn't know because he got the time wrong, and he turned up just as it was finishing. "I see," said Bertie. "Rule number 1. 90% of success is just turning up. Always arrive at an exam half an hour early and check and double check the timetable beforehand." And Tim thought that Bertie's advice was jolly interesting because he hadn't thought of that before. And then Bertie asked him how the story composition went.
"Oh, I did really well in storytelling."
Bertie was pleased because he kind of hoped that a little of his own storytelling skill would have rubbed off on Tim. But then Tim went on,
"I finished first by a mile. I just wrote, 'Once upon a time, there was a prince and princess. They lived happily ever after.' The end. Everyone else took ages to catch up."
"Right," said Bertie. "Rule number 2. Slow and steady wins the race. Use all the time available." And then he asked him how he did in mathematics.
"Oh, not too bad," said Tim. "The questions were really hard, but I made a good guess at the answers."
"Ah. Rule number 3, said Bertie. "No guessing. And never panic. no matter how hard the questions seem at first. Keep a cool head and work your way steadily through them. And they swam on while Tim thought about that one. And now finally, how was history? Asked Bertie.
Well, I thought I did really well, said Tim, because I wrote down some really funny answers.
OK, said Bertie. Rule number 4. Exams are no joking matter. And then Bertie gave Tim some more rules for exams. Before you do anything else, read through all the questions. Make a plan for how much time you need on each answer. Leave some time at the end to read through for mistakes. And they swam around the pond 3 more times and made sure that Tim knew and understood all Bertie's tips. So you see, said Bertie, exams aren't really about being clever. They're about having the right knack. Oh, and there's hard work too. That's the downside. But we can make learning fun. And Bertie and the pond life helped Tim with his lessons. Bertie taught Tim story composition, because making up stories is what Bertie does best. Harry, the centipede, helped Tim with mathematics, because he can count to 100 on his feet. Colin helped Tim with history, because Colin is old and remembers a lot of it himself. And the swallows helped Tim with geography because they fly long distances every year and they see how all the land lies as well as the seas. By the end of the holidays, Tim had learned more things than you would ever have thought possible for one tadpole to hold in his tiny pinhead at one time. And then Tim went back to school and learnt even more interesting things. When the exams came, he followed Bertie's rules. And do you know what? He scored better marks than anyone else in his whole class. And it was a very big class indeed, because there are thousands of tadpoles in the pond. But even though he scored top marks, he only came 2,869th in the class. When Bertie understood that Tim had scored top marks, but was still 2,869th in his class, he went to see the teacher to ask him how this could be. The teacher told him that the school had a rule that you could only improve by 5 places in each exam, because to improve by more than that was impossible. Bertie said that that was jolly unfair, and the school should do more to encourage improvement. Tim swam around, hanging his head low, and saying that there was no point in working hard and doing well, because your efforts weren't recognised. But the next week, Tim started at the big school, and everything was new. There was no unfair rule about how much anyone could improve, and Tim already knew lots of interesting things, and he also had the knack of doing exams. From then on, Tim did rather well at school, and although some people still call him silly every now and then, because he gets really excited and asks lots and lots of questions, nobody calls him stupid anymore. Well, Colin does sometimes, but that's just Colin. And you shouldn't take too much notice of what he says because he's a grumpy old carp. And that's the story of Tim's exams. I do hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget there are loads and loads of stories about Prince Bertie and his pond life friends on storynori.com. Stories like Bertie and the Lion, Agent Bertie, how Colin became grumpy, and Sadie's broken heart, which turns out happily in the end. We really like people to drop by and leave comments on the stories. So, if you've got something you'd like to share with us, anything to do with the characters or the stories, or just your general response, why not drop by and leave us one? For now, from me, Natasha. Bye bye!